But I started working on this topic around Father's Day. So I was thinking about ancestors and descendants and grandparents and grandchildren. At some point during the last few years, it seemed to my spouse Ann and me that grandchildren are probably not in our future. And for me, this brought some sadness. I'm not a pronatalist. Ann and I have been very careful never to pressure or even really to encourage our kids to have children of their own. It's just not our decision. I want them to make it for themselves, either way. But I see you grandparents. I know what I'll be missing, and I'm kind of sad. I also know intellectually that what truly matters in this world is not my grandchildren anyway, but the grandchildren. Humanity is in a precarious place, one where it's no longer possible to protect my grandchildren unless we repair the world for all the grandchildren. This is my mom with her two great-grandchildren. Only one of them is a genetic descendant of hers. Can you tell which? No, you cannot. And if for even a fraction of a second you thought you could, well, think about that. Our brains have habits, and those habits come from somewhere. That's what I'm getting at this morning. This is my mom's father, my grandfather. He was a good man and a product of his time, is the polite way to say it. He believed deep in his bones that German people are the best, and he kept this detailed hierarchy of ethnicities and racial groups somewhere in his head. And I don't actually know how long his ancestors were in North America, but I'm pretty sure they were German. That's just part of my heritage, right? On the other side, my father's father was a genealogist, so I know more about his side. I know that his ancestors were here a pretty long time. For example, I am directly related to the Admiral Dewey, who is known as the hero of Manila Bay for defeating the Spanish Armada during the Spanish-American War. And this grandfather was pretty unhappy that I changed my last name when Ann and I got married. That's also just part of my heritage, my American heritage. Well, every summer on July 4th, most Americans celebrate the victory of plucky pioneer forefathers over the well-regimented armies of an oppressive monarch, a victory which we celebrate by blowing stuff up. Well, I happen to really love fireworks, even knowing that fireworks are a reenactment of exactly what's happening in Ukraine right now. Fireworks are a beautiful and inspiring way that we glorify what is inherently evil. I can't reconcile these things, and I still love fireworks. My American heritage. Well, in 2008, I took a test of implicit bias, and I discovered that in spite of all my enlightened efforts at treating people the same, my subconscious mind holds a stubborn bias against people of color. And ever since then, I've been looking more critically at my own heritage, especially its origins. Where did these brain habits come from? Where did white culture come from? How did we get here? Well, after reading this book, I have an answer, or at least a good clue. I think the origins of my American heritage are rooted in trauma. We know that families that have endured trauma are more prone to things like addiction, abuse, neglect, other kinds of family dysfunctions. And such families often have an unspoken code of conduct, as described by the 12-step group, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Other Dysfunctional Families. And that unspoken code says, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, and don't remember. Don't talk about the family dysfunctions. Don't trust anyone because traumatized people are unpredictable. They can be violent. Don't feel your feelings because they don't matter, and you'll be punished if you express them. And then don't remember anything that would undermine the happy family facade, because everyone else is just going to deny it anyway. Disney got it right with Encanto. This is a family rooted in trauma. We don't talk about Bruno. We work and we fight and we sulk, but we don't talk, trust, feel, or remember. Now, when nations are rooted in trauma, the same code applies. We get racial hierarchies. We get violence and the threat of violence as the only imaginable means of security. We get soul-crushing patriarchies and the kind of shallow nationalism that requires us to forget our own history. This then manifests as a social culture that idealizes individualism, selfishness, neglect of community and the commons, consumerism, and this strange obsession with bootstraps. So what is this trauma I keep talking about? Just imagine what it was like to live in Europe during the Middle Ages. Brutal, ongoing oppression from people who look just like you, with routine torture, wars, famines, plagues, cruel punishments that would be trauma-inducing for us to even imagine. Think about the toll the pandemic took on our mental health, and then multiply that by constant war and famine and torture, and make it last for 1,000 years, 50 generations. And by the time the Renaissance came around, my ancestors were severely damaged, and they didn't even know it. They called it Western civilization. Did you know that until about 1800, a common form of summertime entertainment in Europe and its colonies was cat burnings? Entire villages would turn out. They'd fill a sack with cats and then burn them alive over a bonfire for the sheer hilarity of it. That's not mental illness. My ancestors were damaged, traumatized, mentally ill, and we've never addressed it. At this point, you've probably seen or heard this word. It might be related to how medieval trauma could still affect me today. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. Epigenetics is a relatively new, pioneering branch of molecular genetics, and it's only really been around since about the 1990s. I'm going to grab my water. Hold on. So in school, you probably learned about how genes are encoded by DNA and how those gene blueprints determine all your physical features and some mental and emotional ones too. But that's not the whole story. Our genes come with packaging. And for decades, we thought that that packaging was inert, that it had no role in our development. But it turns out it plays a fairly active role in gene expression. So genes, the DNA, gets turned on or off, or more or less active, based on the packaging around them. And that packaging can be inherited. That's called epigenetic inheritance, because your genes, the DNA itself, isn't changed, but its activity can be changed in a way that is passed on. Well, what does this have to do with trauma? Well, the seminal experiment on this was just done in 2013, pretty recent. The experimenters exposed mice to acetophenone, which smells like cherry blossoms, just for a few seconds, during which they gave them a harmless but painful shock to their feet. And they did this 5 times. The next day, 5 more times. A whiff of cherry blossoms, shock to the feet. And then again on a 3rd day. That's it. After that, they let the mice live out their lives, including mating and having babies. When the baby mice were grown, they exposed them to that same smell and they immediately became anxious. Their heart rate and blood pressure rose, and their behavior looked like panic. A whole generation later, the grandchild mice reacted the same way to the smell of cherry blossoms. So, they kind of scratched their heads. This is not supposed to be possible. And they ran the experiment again, but this time they isolated the babies from the parents at birth. Same thing. They used in vitro fertilization and surrogate mothers. Same thing. And these were just harmless shocks over 3 days. This result is so surprising and potentially so relevant to who we are that the field has exploded. So now there are hundreds of studies on epigenetically inherited effects of trauma. And it's not simple or clear-cut. There are lots of factors. Not all traumas and not all stimuli show up as dramatically as with the mice. But the concept has electrified the relevant sciences. And if it pans out, it suggests that some of our gut reactions, including ones we maybe don't like about ourselves, may have been programmed long before we were even born. The connection that Resmamenicum makes in his book is that our modern global culture, and specifically Euro-American culture, is rooted in the trauma of medieval Europe, no matter how it got passed down to us. And that trauma informed and shaped my Euro-American heritage. And it allowed my ancestors to brutalize and exploit indigenous people everywhere they went, initiating a self-repeating cycle of intergenerational trauma and dysfunction that continues today. Trauma and dysfunction are transmitted directly through abuse and exploitation, but also culturally and possibly epigenetically to some extent. So it's deeply embedded in our bodies, our minds, our emotional responses, our language, and our religious traditions. Explains a lot, doesn't it? So what do we do now? Knowing that all of us are affected by this post-medieval stress disorder, how do we honor the grandchildren and release them from the cycle? Well, I think we have to carefully examine and, yes, defy our own cultural heritage. Raise your hand if the extreme consumerism around Christmas bothers you. Yeah. Now, keep your hand up if you're still participating in it. Right? Yeah, it happens every time. I think we've got to pay attention to those nagging feelings and follow them to a new way of being American, a new way of celebrating winter holidays. That's an act of defiance. It's not easy, but it's also an act of love for the grandchildren. I think we have to break the rules that we inherited from our dysfunctional families and cultures. We have to talk about uncomfortable subjects. We have to trust our neighbors and people that we reflexively regard as the other. We have to feel our feelings and honor them. Find out what they're trying to tell us. And we have to remember the foolish and evil stuff in our heritage along with the glorious triumphs. There are glorious triumphs, and their celebration will be so much more meaningful if we remember honestly and authentically the missteps and the errors and the awfulnesses that taught us to reach for them. Remembering it all requires a kind of defiance that's rooted in love for the grandchildren. So we have these intersecting threads. Research on direct trauma and its effects on our bodies. Studies of epigenetics as a possible transmitter of trauma through generations. A commitment to building a new way for the grandchildren. And our UU values to guide our way. And woven together, these threads suggest that if we want to bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice, if we want to create inclusive, beloved community, we have to start with ourselves. We have to start with our bodies. We have to think globally and act locally, think 7 generations and act now. And it doesn't get any more here and now than our own bodies and minds, right? How do we heal from this? Well, there's not a whole lot of scientific consensus on that yet. But Resmaa Menakem describes techniques his ancestors used to soothe their bodies and build resilience during the compounded traumas of enslavement and the Jim Crow era. I encourage you to study his books with others and to incorporate the techniques he offers into your daily routines. Holocaust descendant and trauma therapist Gabor Mate is another good source. And then Ann and I were blown away by a talk given by Vietnamese refugee and trauma educator Linda Tai, who studied with Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score. You may have heard of that book. There are lots of resources and lots of movement in the field of healing from trauma, both our own trauma and ancestral trauma. My own path urges me to weave in what I've learned from Brené Brown, from yoga and other somatic practices like deep tissue massage therapy, Sufi and folk dancing, and 12-step recovery. And taken together, they tell me that justice requires healing relational and systemic harms through healing ourselves of residual trauma. So to that end, I want to offer some affirmations that may help. And they reflect wisdom from all of those sources. So none of these will be surprising or new to you. And in full disclosure, I should say that I consulted with an AI as I researched the commonalities among these many different approaches. So not all the turns of phrase in these affirmations are mine. And the ushers, I understand, have printed copies of these. So get one and put it on your fridge or mirror on your way out. In the interest of time, I'm just going to skim through them, but I think they're worth taking some time with when you get home. So maybe consider one affirmation a day on rotation or something. Justice requires healing. My healing is sacred, necessary, and revolutionary. You know, a surgeon can't heal using a dirty scalpel. And we can't create justice while we're still expressing a traumatized Eurocentric culture. Einstein said something to the effect that you can't solve a problem using the same level of thinking that caused it. We have to evolve. And that's a sacred, defiant, necessary process. Healing is not a race. I honor my unique rhythms, knowing growth takes time and tenderness. One of Tema Okun's characteristics of white culture is urgency. Our economic system insists on it, right? Time is money. We think it's normal to be frantic all the time. It's not. I am whole even as I heal. I am enough even as I grow. Even the most broken among us have inherent worth. The trauma response is defensive. Evolution gifted us with it because it bestows survival and resilience. Our personal and cultural defects served a purpose that's no longer relevant, so we can thank them and release them. My worth is not defined by my productivity, perfection, or performance. Talk about defiant. Any other workaholics in here? If my only value is in what I accomplish, then productivity becomes all that matters. But we are so much more than our products. I think we have to love ourselves when our culture keeps telling us that our value is measured by our work, by our possessions, what our bodies look like. Talk about an act of defiance. I'm allowed, excuse me, I am allowed to feel all my emotions. There is no shame in my pain. And we don't handle grief very well in our culture. We give each other timelines saying, isn't it time you got over it? Move on with your life. Let's grieve in community, vulnerably, for as long as it takes. We also place limits on who's allowed to express anger and when and how. Emotions are embodied. We don't choose them. And when we put a lid on them, they often squirt out sideways as violence or depression. I reject shame as a tool for growth and choose compassion for myself and others. Love demands compassion, including for myself. I'm often last in line for my own care. Shame is easy, but recovering addicts will tell you that when it comes to growing beyond our worst instincts, shame just makes things worse. My body carries wisdom as well as wounds. I listen to it with curiosity and care. How do I feel right now? Will I honor that feeling or shut it down? I choose authenticity over approval, even when it's uncomfortable. I can speak my truth with courage and still be loved. I'm a beginner at this one. The fear of conflict is strong in me. I embrace vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness. Asking for help is a strength. There's an old saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Our greatest accomplishments, from building the pyramids to building the beloved community, require deep cooperation among vast teams of people working together. Rugged individualism deters us from even assembling those teams. I listen to understand, not to fix, judge, or defend. Now, this affirmation presumes that I listen at all, right? So I have to start with just those first two words myself. I listen, period. Old cis white guys like me tend to take up a lot of cultural space. I'm doing it right now, right? I can talk less and listen more, especially with my political and cultural opponents. There's a ton of research now that says curiosity is more persuasive than evidence. When we listen with genuine curiosity to others' perspectives, it opens them to reconsider their perspectives. Once aware of an unhealthy pattern, I lean into the discomfort with grateful acceptance and curiosity before I take action. We in our culture tend to jump from awareness straight to action without taking time to fully understand and accept reality as it is. A premature rush to fix a problem we don't fully understand is a recipe for continuing the cycle. I release any inherited pain and fear that no longer serve me, and I bless the resilience that remains. Resmanicum uses the phrase somatic abolition, abolishing the effects of racialized trauma from our bodies. European Americans have this work to do too. It's precisely because love is not at the center of American cultural values that makes Unitarian Universalism such a needed voice, however we symbolize that love. I only have glimmers of what my ancestors went through, but I'm aware that almost every immigrant to this continent came as a refugee from some kind of trauma: religious persecution, famine, extreme poverty, war, genocide, or enslavement. And of course, Native Americans are refugees from all of those traumas, but inflicted on them in their own land. So this trauma is in all of us. The most recent science we have says that our ancestors' trauma may live on in our bodies as well as our minds, our culture, and our spirits. This is part of our heritage. For those of you who've been holding your breath this entire time, trying to figure out what is going on in this picture, I'll tell you sort of. One of these kids is a genetic descendant of my mom, and the other is the child of the same-sex marriage of my mom's grandchild. And no, there is no way to tell from the photo which is which. And the point is that to my mom, it makes no difference whatsoever. They are her great-grandchildren, full stop. And I got to point out that in spite of those adorable bow ties, you don't know these kids' genders either. No one does. We won't know for sure until they tell us. As it turns out, there is some small hint of a possibility that there might be grandchildren for Ann and me, but I'm not going to hold my breath. There are millions of grandchildren out there for me to love and nurture. But to do that in good conscience, I think I have to strive not to pass on the unresolved trauma that comes with my European American heritage. And to do that, I have to defy some aspects of that heritage with love, for love. I have work to do. We have work to do. Let's get started. May it be so.